The morning light streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Chicago office, casting geometric shadows across the architectural blueprints scattered on my drafting table. 2 years and 2 months have passed since the incident at Roosevelt Elementary, but I can still feel the precise sting of that July afternoon when I watched my brother Camden accept gratitude that belonged to me. As I sip my Ethiopian coffee from the ceramic mug my colleague Sarah brought back from her sabbatical in Portland, I find myself thinking about recognition and how easily it can be misdirected when families operate on assumptions rather than facts. Have you ever done something meaningful for others, only to watch someone else receive the credit while you stood invisible in the background? That summer day in 2022 started like any other Wednesday. I was reviewing sustainability reports for our latest school renovation project when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Camden's being honored at Roosevelt Elementary today for his generous contribution to their new library. So proud. Come if you can make it by 3 p.m. The message sat on my screen like a puzzle with missing pieces because Camden had never mentioned donating anything to Roosevelt Elementary, and I knew exactly why. 6 months earlier, I'd received a heartbreaking letter from Mrs. Patricia Chen, Roosevelt's head librarian, describing how their library had been devastated by a burst pipe during the brutal Chicago winter. Water damage had destroyed nearly 80% of their book collection, and the school district's insurance would only cover basic repairs, not replacement of the thousands of books that had formed the heart of their educational program. As someone who'd spent my childhood getting lost in library stacks, the thought of those kids facing empty shelves made my chest tight with the kind of empathy that demands action. My architectural firm, Whitman and Associates, had just completed a $12 million renovation of the Lincoln Park High School Science Wing, and my personal commission from that project had left me with the kind of financial flexibility I'd never experienced before. I'd called Mrs. Chen that same evening and offered to fund not just book replacement, but a complete library renovation that would transform their space into a modern learning environment with comfortable reading nooks, collaborative work areas, and state-of-the-art technology integration. The total commitment was $847,000, more money than I'd ever spent on anything besides my mortgage. But watching those third graders rediscover the magic of reading would be worth every penny. The renovation process had been my secret obsession for months. I'd worked directly with Mrs. Chen and Principal Martinez to design custom shelving that would maximize their limited space while creating distinct zones for different age groups. We installed large windows to flood the space with natural light, added a skylight above the central reading area, and created a cozy storytelling corner with built-in seating that followed the natural curves of the building's architecture. Every detail reflected not just my professional expertise, but my deep personal investment in creating a space where learning could flourish. Mrs. Chen had asked early in the process whether I wanted any public recognition for the donation, and I'd specifically requested anonymity. My reasoning felt sound at the time. I wanted the focus to be on the children and their renewed access to books, not on my personal philanthropy. The last thing a bunch of elementary school kids needed was some architect trying to make their library renovation about her own ego. Plus, I'd grown up in a family where good deeds were supposed to be their own reward, where seeking recognition for generosity was considered somewhat gauche. The library's grand reopening in June had been everything I'd hoped for and more. I'd stood at the back of the crowded room, watching kids run their fingers along the spines of brand new books and settle into the reading nooks I'd designed specifically for their small bodies. Mrs. Chen had given a beautiful speech about community support and the power of literacy, carefully avoiding any mention of the donor per my explicit request. The happiness radiating from those children as they explored their transformed library was the only recognition I thought I needed. But somehow, between June's anonymous grand opening and July's unexpected recognition ceremony, the story had gotten twisted. My family had apparently decided that any significant charitable contribution from a Whitman must have come from Camden, my older brother, who worked in private equity and had a reputation for flashy generosity. Camden had donated to various causes over the years, always publicly, always with photo opportunities, always with carefully crafted press releases that mentioned his firm's community commitment. The assumption that Roosevelt Elementary's mystery benefactor must be him seemed logical to everyone except the person who'd actually written the check. Standing in my office now, I can still remember the surreal feeling of driving to Roosevelt Elementary that July afternoon, unsure whether I should speak up or let Camden have his moment in the spotlight. The decision felt impossibly complicated. Correcting the record would require explaining my own involvement, which meant abandoning the anonymity I'd specifically requested. But watching someone else receive gratitude for my work felt like a betrayal of something fundamental about truth and recognition. What happens when your family's assumptions about who deserves credit become more powerful than the actual facts of who did the work? The Roosevelt Elementary parking lot buzzed with the energy of a community celebration as I pulled my Subaru into a space between a Honda minivan decorated with honor roll bumper stickers and a Tesla that probably belonged to someone from the wealthier section of our district. July heat shimmered off the asphalt, and I could hear the distant sound of children's laughter mixed with adult conversation drifting from the school's main entrance. My stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and dread. I still wasn't sure whether I was here to correct a misunderstanding or witness my brother receive praise for something he'd never done. Walking through the familiar hallways I'd spent months planning and measuring, I felt the strange dissonance of seeing my design work celebrated while knowing that no one in my family understood my connection to this place. The library renovation had been completed exactly to my specifications. The warm oak shelving I'd selected created perfect sightlines through the space. The reading nooks were positioned to catch optimal afternoon light, and the central circulation desk featured the custom curved design that had required 3 revisions with the millwork contractor. Every detail reflected hours of my professional attention, yet I was attending this event as a spectator rather than the person being honored. The ceremony was already underway when I slipped into the back of the crowd gathered in the library itself. Mrs. Chen stood behind a small podium I recognized from school assemblies, her silver hair catching the light from the skylights I'd insisted on installing. "We're here today to thank the generous donor whose contribution made this transformation possible," she announced, her voice carrying the warm authority of someone who'd spent 30 years nurturing young minds. "This beautiful space will serve our students for generations to come, all because one member of our community decided that children's access to books and learning was worth a significant personal investment." I scanned the crowd for Camden and spotted him near the front, wearing his navy blazer and the confident smile he'd perfected during client presentations. He looked completely comfortable in the role of honored philanthropist, nodding graciously as parents and teachers offered congratulations. My parents stood beside him, beaming with the kind of pride I rarely saw directed at anything I accomplished. My mother had worn her pearl earrings for the occasion, and my father's chest was puffed out with the satisfaction of having raised a son who'd made such a meaningful contribution to his community. The renovation you see around you, Mrs. Chen continued, gesturing toward the custom shelving and reading areas, represents not just financial generosity, but thoughtful attention to how children learn and grow. Our donor worked closely with our staff to understand exactly what our students needed, then exceeded every expectation. Her words felt like arrows hitting their intended target, except the target standing in the crowd had no idea he was receiving credit for months of my collaborative planning sessions with teachers and librarians. The cognitive dissonance was almost overwhelming. I was listening to accurate descriptions of work I'd done, planning I'd overseen, and care I'd invested, while watching my brother receive recognition for achievements that were entirely mine. Camden nodded thoughtfully as Mrs. Chen described the donor's deep understanding of educational architecture and commitment to creating spaces that inspire learning. If the situation weren't so frustrating, it would have been almost comical. Camden couldn't tell the difference between sustainable bamboo flooring and traditional hardwood, yet here he was being praised for architectural insight. Principal Martinez stepped forward to add his gratitude, holding a framed photograph that showed the library's before and after transformation. When we first reached out about our crisis, we never imagined finding someone who would not only fund the renovation, but also donate their professional expertise to ensure every detail was perfect for our students. The phrase professional expertise hung in the air like a revelation that should have prompted questions about Camden's qualifications to design educational spaces, but no one seemed to notice the disconnect. My brother's acceptance speech was a masterclass in gracious deflection without actually correcting the record. "I'm just grateful I could help," he said, his voice carrying the modesty that always made people like him more. "Education is the foundation of everything we build as a society, and these kids deserve the very best." Technically, nothing he said was untrue. He was expressing genuine sentiment about education, but his failure to clarify his actual role felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than outright lying would have. If you've ever watched someone receive praise for your work while you stood invisible in the same room, you know the peculiar mixture of fury and helplessness that builds in your chest like pressure in a steam engine. The ceremony continued around me, but I felt increasingly disconnected from the celebration, like I was watching a play where someone had been given the wrong script but everyone else was too polite to point out the error. The breaking point came when Mrs. Chen announced the dedication plaque. Mrs. Chen's voice carried across the library with the ceremonial weight of someone unveiling a monument. "We'd like to present our donor with this dedication plaque that will be permanently installed near the main entrance, so future generations of students will know who made this transformation possible." She lifted a brass plaque from the podium, and even from my position at the back of the crowd, I could see the gleaming metal surface that would memorialize this moment forever. My heart started racing with the sudden realization that this ceremony was about to become much more complicated. The crowd parted slightly as Mrs. Chen walked toward the wall where the plaque would be mounted, creating a clear sightline that allowed me to read the engraved text from across the room. My breath caught in my throat as the words came into focus. "The Quinn Whitman Memorial Library, dedicated July 2022. in grateful recognition of Quinn Whitman's generous contribution to Roosevelt Elementary's educational mission. The plaque bore my name, my actual name, spelled correctly and everything, which meant that somewhere in the administrative chain, someone had maintained accurate records of the donation's true source. The silence that followed Mrs. Chen's announcement stretched like a wire under tension. Camden's confident smile flickered for the first time since I'd arrived, and I watched him process the implications of what he was seeing. My mother's hand flew to her throat in a gesture I recognized from childhood moments when she realized she'd made a significant social error. My father's expression shifted through confusion, embarrassment, and then a kind of resigned understanding that suggested he was beginning to piece together what had actually happened. "There seems to be some confusion," Camden said finally, his voice carrying the diplomatic tone he used when correcting client misconceptions without making them feel stupid. "I think there might be a mix-up with the paperwork." His attempt to salvage the situation was admirable, but Mrs. Chen was already shaking her head with the certainty of someone who'd double and triple-checked her records before ordering an expensive commemorative plaque. "Oh no, there's no mistake," Mrs. Chen replied warmly, scanning the crowd until her eyes found mine at the back of the library. "Quinn has been working with us since January. She designed this entire space, coordinated with our contractors, and funded the renovation. We've been corresponding for months about every detail." Her words cut through the crowd's confusion like a lighthouse beam, illuminating the truth that everyone had somehow managed to overlook. I felt every pair of eyes in the library turn toward me as Mrs. Chen beckoned me forward. Walking through that crowd felt like crossing a minefield of family assumptions and social expectations that had suddenly exploded around us. My mother's face cycled through emotions I could read like a familiar book: surprise, embarrassment, pride, and underneath it all, a kind of hurt that suggested she was wondering why I'd never mentioned my involvement in this project. "Quinn coordinated every aspect of this renovation," Mrs. Chen continued, as I reluctantly made my way to the front of the library. "She spent hours here, measuring, planning, meeting with our staff to understand exactly what our students needed. This beautiful space exists because of her architectural expertise and her generous spirit." Each word felt like vindication and exposure simultaneously. Finally, someone was telling the truth about my involvement, but the revelation was happening in the most public and potentially humiliating way possible. Camden stepped forward and placed his hand on my shoulder with a gesture that managed to be both supportive and apologetic. "I had no idea Quinn was behind this," he said to the crowd, his voice carrying genuine surprise. "I assumed when Mom mentioned the ceremony that it was about some other donation I'd made and forgotten about." His honesty was both refreshing and devastating. It confirmed that our family's assumption about my capabilities was so low that a significant architectural philanthropy project couldn't possibly be attributed to me. My father cleared his throat in the way that usually preceded either an apology or a lecture about family communication. "Quinn, why didn't you tell us you were involved in this project?" His question hung in the air like an accusation disguised as curiosity, and I felt the familiar weight of being asked to justify choices that should have been self-explanatory. "I wanted to keep it anonymous," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mrs. Chen asked if I wanted recognition, and I said no because I thought the focus should be on the kids and their access to books, not on my personal philanthropy." The words sounded perfectly reasonable when I said them, but I could see in my family's faces that they were processing the implications of my months-long secret project with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. The crowd began to relax as the mystery resolved itself, but I could feel the tension building toward a conversation I'd been avoiding for months. This public revelation meant I could no longer pretend that my family's assumptions about my capabilities and contributions were harmless oversights. They reflected something deeper about how I was perceived and valued within my own family structure. The ceremony concluded with a reception in the renovated library, where parents and teachers mingled among the custom shelving I'd designed, while my family processed the revelation that had just exploded their assumptions about my capabilities. I found myself in the surreal position of receiving congratulations from strangers, while my own parents stood nearby looking like they were still trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit their previous understanding of my life. Mrs. Chen approached me near the children's reading corner, carrying a manila folder thick with documentation. "Quinn, I want to show you something that might explain how this confusion happened," she said, opening the folder to reveal months of email correspondence between us. "When your mother called last week asking about the ceremony details, I mentioned that we were honoring the Whitman family member who'd funded our renovation. I think she assumed I meant Camden because—" She paused delicately, clearly trying to avoid saying anything that might embarrass my family further. "Because Camden's the one who usually gets credit for charitable contributions in our family," I finished, saving her from having to articulate what had become painfully obvious to everyone in the room. The email chain she showed me documented our entire collaboration: design meetings, contractor coordination, budget approvals, and detailed discussions about everything from acoustics to ergonomic seating for elementary school children. The professional depth of our communication made it clear that this wasn't a simple financial donation, but a comprehensive architectural project. My father approached us with the measured steps of someone trying to navigate a social situation that had become more complicated than expected. "Quinn, I had no idea you were capable of this kind of comprehensive project," he said, his words careful but revealing. The phrase "capable of" hung between us like a bridge across years of underestimation. He'd watched me graduate from Northwestern with an architecture degree, establish my own firm, and complete million-dollar renovation projects. Yet somehow a library redesign still surprised him. "Dad, this is literally what I do for a living," I replied, gesturing around the space that showcased 6 months of my professional expertise. "I specialize in educational architecture. I've designed learning spaces for 3 school districts in the Chicago area." The information wasn't new. I'd mentioned these projects during family dinners over the years, but apparently my work had been filed under Quinn's hobby rather than Quinn's significant professional achievements. Camden joined our conversation with the kind of diplomatic grace that made him successful in client relations. "I owe you a huge apology," he said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "When Mom called about the ceremony, I should have asked more questions instead of just assuming it was about something I'd done. I've gotten so used to being the family's public face for charitable giving that I didn't even consider other possibilities." His honesty was both healing and illuminating. He acknowledged the pattern of assumption that had led to this moment. My mother materialized beside us, carrying 2 cups of the coffee that Parent-Teacher Association volunteers had set up near the circulation desk. "Honey, why didn't you tell us you were working on something this significant?" she asked, offering me one of the cups with the kind of maternal concern that suggested she was genuinely confused rather than accusatory. "We would have been so proud to support you through this process." The question hit me harder than I'd expected because it forced me to articulate something I'd been avoiding for years. "Mom, when have you ever asked about my work projects in detail? When Camden talks about his deals, the whole family hangs on every word. But when I mention school renovations or sustainable design projects, the conversation gets redirected to something else." The words came out more directly than I'd intended, but the public nature of this revelation seemed to demand a level of honesty we'd been avoiding. The silence that followed my observation was broken by Principal Martinez, approaching with a small group of teachers who wanted to thank me personally for transforming their learning environment. "Ms. Whitman, I hope you can see how much this renovation means to our students," he said, gesturing toward a group of children who were sprawled across the reading area I'd designed, already absorbed in books despite the ongoing adult reception around them. "You've created something that will impact hundreds of kids over the years." Watching those children naturally gravitate toward the spaces I'd designed for them felt like the kind of recognition that mattered more than any family ceremony. Their unconscious comfort in the environment I'd created was evidence that my professional expertise had translated into real-world benefits for the people who mattered most, the students who would spend years learning and growing in this space. "The design is beautiful," added Miss Rodriguez, the third-grade teacher whose input had been crucial during the planning phase. "But what impressed us most was how you listened to our needs and translated them into functional solutions. You turned our wish list into reality." Her comment reminded me why I'd requested anonymity in the first place. The satisfaction came from solving problems and creating positive outcomes, not from receiving public recognition. But standing in that library surrounded by the evidence of my work, while my family finally understood my professional capabilities, I realized that recognition and accomplishment weren't mutually exclusive. I could take pride in my contributions while also expecting my family to acknowledge and celebrate my achievements, rather than attributing them to someone else by default. 2 years and 2 months later, the brass plaque bearing my name has become a permanent fixture at Roosevelt Elementary. But more importantly, the conversation it sparked has permanently shifted how my family perceives and celebrates achievements. The library renovation that began as an anonymous gesture of community support evolved into a catalyst for the kind of honest family communication I'd been avoiding for years. Sometimes the most meaningful recognition comes not from strangers appreciating your work, but from the people closest to you finally seeing your contributions clearly. The immediate aftermath of that July ceremony required several difficult but necessary conversations about family dynamics and assumptions. My parents, to their credit, acknowledged that they'd consistently undervalued my professional accomplishments while overemphasizing Camden's business success. "We've been treating your architecture career like an interesting hobby instead of recognizing it as the substantial professional achievement it actually is," my mother admitted during a coffee meeting the following week. Her willingness to examine her own biases opened the door to more authentic relationships based on accurate understanding rather than outdated assumptions. Camden has become one of my strongest professional advocates, referring potential clients to my firm and making sure his business network understands the scope of my expertise in educational architecture. Last month, he introduced me to the facilities director for his daughter's private school, which led to a $3 million contract to design their new STEM center. "Quinn's not just my sister," he told the school board. "She's the architect who transforms learning environments for a living." The shift from casual family member to respected professional peer has strengthened our relationship in ways I didn't expect. My parents now ask detailed questions about my projects with the same interest they've always shown in Camden's business deals. When I mention meeting with school administrators or coordinating with contractors, they follow up with specific questions about timelines, design challenges, and budget considerations. The change feels profound instead of polite nodding, followed by subject changes. My work has become a legitimate source of family pride and dinner conversation material. The Roosevelt Elementary Library has exceeded every expectation I had when I first committed to the renovation. Mrs. Chen sends me quarterly updates with photos of students using the space, and the reading scores for the school have improved significantly since the library reopened. Children who previously had limited access to books now spend lunch periods curled up in the reading nooks I designed, and the collaborative learning areas host everything from tutoring sessions to creative writing workshops. The investment has generated returns that can't be measured in financial terms. More projects have emerged from the Roosevelt renovation as word spread about my work within the educational community. 3 other elementary schools in our district have contracted with my firm for library and classroom redesigns, and I'm currently working on a comprehensive campus renovation for a middle school in neighboring DuPage County. The professional recognition has led to speaking engagements at educational conferences, where I share insights about creating learning environments that support both individual focus and collaborative engagement. The experience taught me something crucial about the relationship between anonymity and recognition. While my initial instinct to avoid public credit came from genuine humility, I realized that seeking appropriate acknowledgement for professional achievements isn't ego-driven. It's about ensuring that expertise gets credited to its actual source. When families and communities understand who possesses what skills, they're better positioned to support and utilize those talents effectively. My approach to philanthropy has evolved as well. I still prefer meaningful community impact over public recognition, but I no longer insist on complete anonymity. When I funded the new computer lab at Jefferson Middle School last year, I allowed them to include my name in their dedication ceremony. The recognition felt appropriate rather than uncomfortable because it accurately connected the contribution to its source while highlighting work that genuinely benefits students. The brass plaque at Roosevelt Elementary has become something of a family landmark. My niece Emma, Camden's 8-year-old daughter, loves showing her friends Aunt Quinn's library during school visits. Her pride in having an architect in the family who designs spaces specifically for kids like her feels like the kind of recognition that matters most. Inspiring the next generation to see creative problem-solving and community service as natural expressions of professional expertise. What would change in your family dynamics if people stopped making assumptions about who's capable of what and started paying attention to the actual evidence of everyone's contributions? The most lasting impact of that library dedication ceremony wasn't the public recognition or even the beautiful learning space. It was the realization that authentic relationships require accurate understanding of each person's talents, achievements, and value. Recognition doesn't have to choose between humility and visibility. The best acknowledgement celebrates genuine contributions while inspiring others to develop their own capabilities and find their own ways to serve their communities. Sometimes the most meaningful legacy isn't your name on a building. It's the way your example encourages others to build something meaningful themselves.